Welcome to techCast, the podcast where technology meets curiosity, powered by Q&A Marcom. TechCast, where we dive deep into the exciting world of technology, bringing you the latest trends, innovations, and thought-provoking discussions. Join us on this exciting journey as we explore the boundless possibilities of technology. Subscribe to TechCast on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform and never miss an episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to TechCast powered by Q&A Marcom. 5G is a term which we all are talking about in this region, and the most important part of it which we all are concerned and eager to know about it is security and privacy, which brings us here to discuss on the topic 5G, security and privacy, safeguarding networks and user data. Today with us we have our guest speaker, Virgin Mobile CTO, Mr. Imran Shaikh. Hello Imran, welcome to this episode of TechCast.
Thank you for having me.
Give us a little bit introduction about yourself.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, Yeshi, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Virgin Mobile UAE, and I lead the technology team effectively. And we're working on some really cool stuff with Virgin Mobile, which is going to be disrupting the market very soon, empowered by 5G, the topic that you wanted to discuss.
Interesting. Okay, so let's begin with some of our technical questions. With the widespread adoption of 5G technology, what are the unique cybersecurity challenges that the telecom company faces these days in comparison to the previous generation of networks?
As we were speaking previously about the paradigm shift of how we use data these days, does indeed pose quite unique challenges for any telecommunication organization, especially in the GCC. And there's many reasons for that. But one of the reasons being is that our network is very robust and it's very complex and it's very widespread in terms of intricacies of how things are connected, right? So one of the key challenges that you face is actually the fact that it's very complex in terms of its deployment, right? And the complexity of the deployment makes it difficult for you to manage the actual security side of things because you're not limited to one system that you're monitoring or protecting against. You're protecting an entire ecosystem or ensemble of systems that are powering the 5G network, but also all the devices that are connected to the 5G network. So when you talk about a network, you're talking about things that are connected to each other, right? And meshing or a fabric of things that are connected to each other. That includes your personal devices as well. Yeah. So your personal device is actually a threat to the network in itself, if you look at it. So hundreds of thousands of customers that are using their devices lashed onto the network are actually a risk themselves, right? So protecting against those devices, protecting against the cell sites that we have. So, OT, operational technology, all these different devices that we have that are empowering or powering the 5G network, these need to be carefully monitored. Right now, the typical cell sites previously, nobody knew about them because they were standalone. But then now they're connected to the network, right? So they're prone to the attack, right? So the complexity of the 5G installation in itself poses a huge challenge, not just because you have your own organization to protect against the threats, but you also have to look out for every single device that's connecting to your network. For example, if somebody wants to do a denial of service attack or a distributed denial of service attack, it's very easy for them to leverage 5G network now because it has the bandwidth that the broadband network previously had, right? So if you're using a 5G network to do an attack, that is in itself is going to wreak havoc, not just from the perspective of it's doing an attack on a targeted system, but it's going to start creating network congestion. That is what we need to be mindful of, and we need to devise a strategy around. Then we're talking about virtualized network because 5G effectively is software-defined network, and it's heavily virtualized, right? And when you look at the actual implementation of 5G, when it becomes commercialized, the actual use case is actually network slicing. And when you've got different slices of network having different attributes, protecting them from overlapping with each other and protecting them from one user in a particular network slice to jump over into a separate network slice, that in itself requires a lot of planning to make it secure and impenetrable, right? So this is where I think 5G becomes even more complex in terms of securing it.
Okay.
Then we've got the edge computing side of things, right? So edge computing is the best use case that 5G currently has. And what is edge computing, if you ask? Edge
Yeah.
computing is bringing your data centers near to the network to allow for low latency, right? Because currently right now, if you were to, let's say if you have a self-driving car, it's trying to communicate over the network to a neural network to give it directions and to give it commands to, do self-driving. In order for the car to effectively communicate, it needs to have latency which is less than zero, right? Because if you think about it, if there's a car coming at you and the car needs to decide that it needs to brake or swerve, a millisecond counts, right? So if you have latency in the network and the car isn't able to communicate effectively, that use case becomes null and void,
Yeah.
right? So edge computing, of course, makes it even more difficult because now you're taking another organization's data center or another organization's application ecosystem and you're introducing it into the network that's going out to hundreds of thousands of people, right? So yeah, there's these unique challenges, Yeshi, and I can go on forever because, like I said, the network complexity in itself is it's just massive.
It's vast.
And the application of 5G, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. If you look at how we utilize 5G at this point in time, it's actually just a faster version of LTE. We're not using 5G in its true form. 5G's true form will come in when NSA, which is non-standalone, will go away and we switch over to standalone. And that's where the rubber hits the road for 5G. And that's where you're going to start seeing things like guaranteed speed, guaranteed, a separate completely network slice that's made for you with the attributes that you want, virtualized networks, and et cetera, et cetera. Also, you have to think about the fact that whenever a new technology comes in, it leaves behind the legacy technology.
Yes.
But you can't you can't get rid of the legacy technology because let's use today as an example, right? A lot of people still have 3G phones.
3G phones and
right?
4G phones.
Yeah, and 4G as well.
In a lot of areas while you go, so you get the 4G network instead of 5G network. So a lot of people are using 3G and 4G nowadays. Yes, people are
Absolutely.
using it.
A wide percentage of people have not upgraded their phones to a 5G device. And
Not
because
yet.
of that, you also need to account that there's a user base that's out there that's using legacy technology. Now you need to interconnect your latest and the greatest, which is 5G for the time being, NSA, to the legacy technology, which is 4G and 3G at this
3G.
point in time. Right? So that interconnectivity poses a risk because then you need to create a bridge in between the two technologies.
Yes.
And that bridge can be easily exploited. And then you can find backdoors to get into the network and, of course, wreak havoc.
Okay. So as we move towards a more interconnected world with 5G, how do you strike balance between network performance and security measures?
That's a really good question because when you're talking about security and performance, these are two different concepts, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to network, right? Network performance, what does network performance mean to you, right?
Yeah.
Network performance actually, so if you're guaranteeing a speed to somebody, so for example, let's say I go out there and I guarantee a speed of 1 gigabit per second. When we get into a position of offering speed-based pricing, the customer is going to expect 1 gigabit per second, for example, right? In order to ensure that, you need to do a lot of performance testing, right? You need to be able to go to different areas of the city and go to different cell sites and see how they're performing, not just from the perspective of throughput to one user, but create a congestion on the network and see how the network performs with the congestion. Is the quality of service being degraded or is it still the same, right? So performance testing is an art, because you're not just looking at it from the perspective of throughput, you're also doing stress testing, and then you're doing soak testing, because the stress test is one to see when your technology is going to break down based on the burden that you're putting through it. Then you have to look at it from the perspective of soak testing, because soak testing actually takes the stress for a lengthier period of time, and you need to assess whether your systems are resilient enough to be able to handle that load. Because, like I mentioned previously, the intent for the stress test is to put enough stress and see when your system breaks down.
Yeah.
But soak testing actually takes it to the step further to see, okay, if your system is not breaking down, how long will it take for it to break down?
Yeah.
Based on the number of traffic that
to know its ability.
Yeah,
like how
of course,
it is,
of
like
course, yes.
how long it is going to work.
That's correct. That's correct. Now let's talk about your security side of question, because performance testing, like I said, is a completely different beast to tackle.
Concept.
But now coming back to your security side of things, you need to start looking at, okay, we are expecting this much of throughput. How are we going to able to make our system not just resilient from the perspective of throughput, but how is the system going to heal itself? Do we have measures in place to detect threats and then act on them? So for the example that I used previously of distributed denial of service attacks, these things will cause network congestions. What security measures are in place to not just fix it, but detect it proactively before your system goes down? Because it's one thing to fix things after the fact, another to proactively detect it and then self-heal the system so that the system never goes down. The service that you're providing to your customers is completely uninterrupted. So, of course, your network is complex. Every single component that you have needs to have its own security measures, but collectively giving you a single pane of glass of how things are moving along, right? But when it comes to authentication, when it comes to letting users use your network, the encryption becomes then important, right? Because when you've got so much traffic going in, you need to encrypt the traffic end to end. And that authentication encryption mechanism that you have in your network also becomes very critical part of your security architecture. And like I said, when you've got distributed systems or distributed security architecture, this becomes even more critical, because you need to be able to communicate with one system to another and be sure that it is these two systems that are supposed to be talking to each other, and there hasn't been a third party that's come in. Ultimately, to the end user, it will always be transparent of what technology is powering their devices. But in the background, there's a lot of security measures that need to be in place to have the interconnectivity in between the different components that power the customer devices. Also, when it comes to 5G, you're going to start hearing about it very frequently when 5G standalone comes into play, and that is coming in the near future.
So right now, the 5G which we are using, it's not a standalone thing?
No,
and
it's not. It's ultimately, currently right now, the 5G that we have is just a faster version of LTE. And it's coined, in the industry, it's coined as non-standalone.
Non-standalone. It's like we have 5G, but we don't have 5G.
That
it's
is
like
correct.
that?
That is correct. Well, I mean, if you look at the use case for the customers, 5G is an evolution over LTE, because LTE was giving you a certain bandwidth, and now 5G in its current implementation is giving you 10-folds of what was previously available.
Right?
In fact, it's so good now that you can use 5G as your broadband device at home. Like, for example, Virgin Mobile currently right now sells 5G home internet solutions. Right. So that said, it's still not reached its peak yet, or its actual use case for what 5G has been, in development for the last decade or so. Standalone technology, 5G standalone technology, is going to change that, and that is going to give you a quality of service, right? And when I say quality of service, it's actually network prioritization. For example, like I mentioned previously, if you sign up for a plan which gives you 100 megabit per second, you will always have 100 megabit per second, irrespective of how many people around you are latched onto the same network. Currently, right now, you can't say that. if you cannot be guaranteed a speed of service in 5G's current implementation. There's no way, right? And this is why I say that non-standalone technology is completely different from standalone technology.
Standalone technology.
Right? It's no different from LTE, where LTE couldn't guarantee you a speed. 5G in its current implementation cannot guarantee you a speed. Currently, right now, if you were to go buy a mobile plan, or you consume data, are you guaranteed a speed? Do the telecom providers say that you will have at least 100 megabit per second, or 200 megabit per second, or 300 megabit per second?
No, never. Like
The-
we have this, like this is your particular plan. We never get the like verdict from their side, like this particular amount of speed you are gonna get.
That is correct, Yeshi. And this is what separates non-standalone technology to standalone technology in 5G. With non-standalone technology, there's no guarantee of speed. Of course, you have better speeds than what you did previously in LTE technologies,
Yes.
but you don't have still the guarantee that you would typically have in your fixed lines. For example, your home broadband, what are you really buying? You're buying 500 megabit per second, 200 megabit per second, 100 megabit per second. You're paying, your price model is a speed-based pricing, because your home internet can actually guarantee you a speed.
Yes.
This is not the case with wireless at this point in time. The moment we shift over to 5G standalone implementation, that is going to change. The concept of quality of service is going to come into play, where you're going to be guaranteed the service that you're buying. And that is where the speed-based plans are going to come in eventually,
okay.
right?
So-
And they may not. There may not be a speed-based price, but you will at least be guaranteed a
This
speed.
particular amount of speed you are gonna
That's
get
correct.
in this particular
Yeah,
plan.
exactly. And think of it from business to business perspective. This is going to be a huge transformation or a paradigm shift of how data centers operate. So currently, right now, data centers are operating on fixed lines, right? But imagine having your server with a SIM card, or not even a SIM card, but embedded SIM that allows for you to get the same network speed that you're guaranteed with your internet service provider, right? So are you going to have those lengthy LAN cables, switches, and etc. in your data center? No, your data center will
Everything
look
will be
completely
wireless.
different. It's going to be completely wireless.
Wireless, yeah.
And so while this is going to 5G standalone is going to drive a shift in mentality of how we use our devices as consumers, it's going to have a larger impact in the wider industry that utilizes network to be operational, right? All of the robots that are in car manufacturing are going to be using wireless. All of the servers in the data centers are going to start using wireless.
Wireless
And
technologies.
they will have the same guaranteed speed, if not more. So think of how much the industry is going to change with the standalone technology, right? B2B market is where you're going to see the larger impact of 5G standalone.
When we will have the 5G technology, which is like stand-alone, at that time it's gonna be like on different level what we are having right now.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about a paradigm shift. Like I keep mentioning the word paradigm shift because it actually is. It's going to be a completely different way of us communicating between devices.
The increasing use of biometric authentication and personal data on 5G devices raises concern about user privacy. How telecom companies address that concern and protects the user data?
Yeah, Yashi, you're absolutely right. When it comes to customer privacy and when it comes to security practices, they go hand in hand. In fact, customer privacy should be the first consideration when you're architecting your security infrastructure or security architecture, for the lack of better words. And this way, when you're doing privacy by design, your customer privacy becomes paramount as part of any development practices that you have and any product offering that you're going to be putting out in the market. And what you also need to realize, Yeshi, that the more connected we become,
Yes.
the more transparent we need to be with our customers about our privacy policies. right? Because the customers themselves sometimes don't know what they're signing up for,
Exactly.
right? So in order to be able to incorporate biometrics as part of the authentication mechanism, incorporating different sort of mechanisms like OTP or multi-factor authentication, you need to be able to let the customer know that we are doing X, Y, and Z
Exactly.
to protect you.
Your particular data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And more often than not, you would find that if you're being transparent to your customers, they're likely to adopt a feature that you want them to adopt for their own security,
Security. Yeah.
right? But being transparent is the key.
Transparency is like basically important, and nowadays like transparency is so much more important. And what we say, people are actually concerned about to know like how my data is being like saved on like for signing up everything. Like if I have to sign up for any of the particular thing, if I am even downloading any of the app in my particular phone, so I have to like go through each and everything, like what is going to do what like so transparency is much more important for customers. As a customer, I would say.
Yeah, and then so the next step, so first step is being transparent about your security policies, about the feature that you are implementing to keep the customer secure. And the second part is the customer buy-in, right? Customers consent. And once you have the consent, then you're able to let the customer utilize the security framework that you've put in place to make them secure, their devices secure, the network secure, right? So that consent is the follow-up piece, which is even more critical, because ultimately we've gone down the road in previous past, and you can look at the history of failures where people weren't asked for their consent and their data was being used, and it just blew up in the faces of the company that were adopting these practices, right? So without naming any names, I think if you want to avoid a disaster with respect to customer loyalty, with respect to customer privacy, it's very important not just to be transparent, but garner consent, solicit consent of the customer, so that the customer is not only just, like I mentioned previously, being educated and making the informed decision to sign up for a service, but they're also giving you the consent that, yes, you know what, I am allowing you
I
to
know
make
what
my
I am signing up for.
Exactly. So we've talked about educating the user by being transparent and by getting their consent, but now what are you going to do to ensure that you are protecting your customer? This is where the encryption practices come in, right? Because ultimately, anytime you're interacting with a device, you need to encrypt the traffic, right? So that it couldn't be leaked, it couldn't be misused, right? If it's leaked, or it shouldn't be infiltrated, right? Because if it's infiltrated, then exfiltration happen of data, right? So ultimately, encryption becomes a critical piece when it comes to network device-to-device communication. Secure biometric authentication is another way to ensure that we are talking to the right user, right? And now we have, I think pretty much every device, the new device that you buy has some sort of biometric authentication mechanism built in, right? Leveraging that, but also leveraging your own security practices that you may have in place to authenticate the customer. Combination of that becomes the ultimate combination for offering security to your customers. There's also government entities as well that are allowing you to leverage the device security mechanism along with their biometric authentication. So for example, facial recognition, right? Of course, you have facial recognition
is one of the things.
Yeah, it's one of the biometric authentication mechanisms that are out there, but that's on your device. But if you were to look at, for example, in the UAE, facial recognition is being used for several other government transactions as well. Right? For example, e-gates. At this point in time, when you go through an e-gate, you can go through, you can do facial recognition and go through the gate.
Whole process is
done. Exactly. It becomes a seamless process. Leveraging government services for facial recognition, along with the facial recognition that you have in your device, creates a very secure atmosphere for your customer in terms of security. And it basically strengthens your security posture as an organization, because now you're not just relying on the device that can be misused if it gets stolen or misplaced, but you're also authenticating the customer using government database, which is the single source of truth.
Yeah. Like for any kind of evidence you need, you have this particular thing already stored in data. Like we can say everything is interconnected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's leveraging the different endpoints
Yeah.
for security and connecting them together as a security fabric, right? Or security mesh, for the lack of better words, is what's going to allow for you to have a seamless experience for the customer, but a secure experience for the customer.
So like we can say that biometric authentication is something which is secure for the customer as well as for the particular region or a country.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you know what? Biometric authentication is the next best thing. You cannot get any more authentic.
Exactly.
Because with biometric authentication, you are actually authenticating a person.
Yes.
Not a user.
Not a user. Yeah. Like user can be anyone, but it's like, yeah, authentication by a particular face, like this biometric things, like facial recognition, your fingerprints is something. Yeah.
I always like to use the term that you can forget your email address,
Yeah.
but you cannot forget your face.
It's so true.
Right?
Yeah.
Your face will always be with you, and so long as facial recognition technologies exist, you will never have to remember your email addresses in the future.
Sure. So like how would you like to conclude this particular discussion?
So Yashi, it's a very interesting topic when it comes to 5G security, network security as a whole, that the moment this conversation is over, our discussion is outdated. The reason being is because the threat landscape when it comes to network security is constantly growing.
Yeah.
And as we adopt more and more 5G and we transition to 5G standalone, the dynamics of security is going to change. And this is the reason why we need to constantly evolve with the time when it comes to our security posture and security practices, and ultimately ensure that we put user privacy always first, because that will define your security posture to be strong and resilient.
Perfect. So with this, we come to an end of our interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Imran, for coming to the podcast, and see you soon for our next episode.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me, Yashi, and I hope we were able to demystify some of the myths around 5G.
Yeah, we got to know
5G
a lot.
security.
Exactly. We got to know a lot of terms as well, and I got to learn a lot about what actually involves in telecom sector. So yeah, that was an actually interesting discussion.
TechCast, powered by QNA Marcom, demystifying technology, one episode at a time.